God help us, folks. You know, this sounds a lot to me like what I used to read about communism back when I was a kid growing up in the 1970s. But it's here, and it's now, and it's in the United States of America. And are you listening to me?
Yep, that's right.
You may not like what I'm telling you, Dave, but I'm telling you the truth. And telling you this thing's coming like a steamroller, and they're already silencing people. That's what they're trying to do, and they're trying to silence the church. Because they understand the power of the church. And God help us, they have been very successful in the last generation or two in silencing the church. This whole thing of losing your 501c3 status is a whole message. This really isn't part of my message. But then this message, I never did get much of it preached. Amen?
Amen.
But this whole thing, well, hey, we can't speak from the pulpit because we might lose our 501c3 status. Let me give you a couple things. First of all, let's suppose that's true. Let's suppose, and so you go to a church where the pastor does something which speaks up politically and loses your 501c3. First of all, if your pastor did that, understand this. He would be the first church in 54 years of that law. You would be, Mountain Avenue Baptist Church would be the first church to ever lose their 501c3 status in the history of the United States.
Wow.
All right? That'd be number one. It ain't ever happened. All right? So that's number one. Number two, let's suppose that happened. And so now you lose that and you go to heaven and you pass away. You know, time goes on. We all die. We go to heaven. And so now here you are standing in heaven. And somebody from Syria, you have to be standing beside them in heaven. And you say to them, you know, when did you live on the earth? They say, well, 2015, I was down there. And that's when I died. You said, really? You're there in heaven? You say, well, what happened? You say, well, I was in Syria. I was a Christian, and I wouldn't deny Christ, and they killed me. So now there you are. You're like, well, you know what? I was down there 2015 too. And I know what happened to you, and I know what you went through in that persecution. But listen to this. I lost my 501c3 status. You know what? I'm sure that Syrian believer is going to stand there in awe. You got to be kidding me. Folks, do you realize if it was true, and nobody's losing their 501c3 status, but if it was true, do you realize what we are selling out for?
Yes, sir.
And do you realize how weak that is going to sound in eternity someday? Amen. I really don't think we'll talk about it, even if it happens, amen? But the other, last point to be made on this issue is this. That whole issue is an issue of the freedom of speech. And here's what you ask yourself. Does your pastor lose his freedom of speech as an American when he steps behind the pulpit? You say, well, Pastor, the church sits on property that is tax-exempt property. Yes, and if you go in Iowa, I'm not familiar with California, but if you go to Iowa and you look at the tax records and you go to our church's property, sure enough, when you look at the assessment in taxes, it's zero. But can I tell you another little secret? When you go to the Union Hall in town and click on their property and look at the taxes they're assessed, it's zero too. Now, why is it that they can line up signs all up and down their property, vote for this candidate, vote for that candidate, every time an election cycle comes around, but the church isn't allowed to do that? You just explain that to me.
That's right.
That's all I'm asking. I'm not saying you should line them up out here, but I'll tell you what, if this church wanted to, you ought to be able to.
Amen. Yes, sir.
God help us, you're citizens, you're all. I think I look out here, it looks like we probably got some people here paying taxes, amen?
Every year.
Every time you go down to buy some gasoline, you're paying taxes. Every time you buy anything, your property tax, your house taxes.
Yeah.
God help us. We got to stand up, or we're going to lose our liberty.